Dylan got it bumping. Dylan got it bumping. Dylan got it bumping. Dylan got it bumping. Dylan got it bumping.
Welcome back to this episode of the For All Nerds Show. Today, as always, is a very special day. I mean, every episode is very special, but this one, I promise you, is going to be legendary because we have a returning guest, someone who honestly, I can't even believe we had him on the first time, and now he's back again. You know, you might know him from a little show called Lost, Crossing Jordan, all the way back to Nash Bridges, you know, Cowboys and Aliens, Prometheus, Star Trek Into Darkness, Tomorrowland, Leftovers for HBO. Something we all know and love around here, a little show called Watchmen. Let's all welcome the one and only Damon Lindelof to the Spaceship tonight. Yay!
Always an honor to be aboard. I can't believe you asked me that. Thank you. I feel honored.
I appreciate the squid hat that you have on, the shelter.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
We had these made, obviously, well before the pandemic because Looking Glass has a squid shelter. But people think that it's people are like, oh, is that the coronavirus on your hat? And I'm like, no, it's a squid.
I mean, at this point, it might as well be. So.
Might as well be.
Both of them have devastated New York, sadly. You know,
there you go.
There we go. Wow. Didn't mean to go there so early, folks.
Like
but
so dark. Man, I mean.
Yeah, so much for small talk.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so dark. I mean, you know, this just brings up like this question I just had for you. Like, how weirded out are you, Damon? That I just feel like life is now imitating art, particularly your art. Or do you just feel uniquely prepared for all this foolishness that's happening?
I'm uniquely unprepared for all this foolishness. I mean, I don't know. I think that our culture has been really interested in the end of the world for the past 5,000 years. And movies and television shows and comic books have always been flirting with the idea of those stakes, you know, the end of the world. And so when something happens in real life that seems to be moving into the end times, it's not like we predicted it. It's just sort of like people were throwing up their hands going, see, this is what I was talking about. It is definitely strange to see people walking around in masks, but I think the context in which we used it on Watchmen was entirely different than the one that we're seeing it demonstrated out in the world now. And obviously The Leftovers was a show where 2% of the world's population abruptly disappeared. And so it was certainly strange in the early days of the coronavirus that people were saying, well, let's get herd immunity. It's going to kill 2% of us, but that's so that the other 98% of us can survive. And I was like, oh, that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
But that was Tom Perrotta's book. That had nothing to do with me. So I blame him.
I like how you pass on the shift the blame.
Yeah, real quick.
To the left. I love it. I love it.
Got nothing to
I'm
do
not
with that
Nostradamus. I just adapted Nostradamus.
As you should. But Leah, I've seen your Instagram post, and you know, you had the one jokingly about like the cops are now wearing masks. Like we see cops wearing masks. So, and there's a lot of stuff in Watchmen that comes up in our world already, even from the book to, you know, what you adapted and all the changes you made, everything, the story you chose to tell. But did you think that it would be so prescient? Like, did you think that right now, not even a year, like not even a year later, cops in masks, et cetera, et cetera?
Not in a million years. And I think that, you know, if Watchmen hadn't been released when it was, for example, it came out in October of let's just say nobody had seen it yet. You couldn't put it on now, and the mask wouldn't have the same power. They'd be the meaning of seeing someone in a mask has totally been transformed by what's happened culturally. It's normalized, and I think that when you think about Watchmen, which is all about the emotional idea behind masking is that it conceals and reveals at the same time. The mask that you choose is a reflection of your trauma, but it also can be used by law enforcement as a way of erasing accountability, which is something that we're dealing with on a daily basis culturally. every day in America and have been for as long as America has existed. But I think, never more so than, the last 5 years in terms of our awareness of that idea. But I think that the cops who are wearing masks now are doing it under the auspices of protecting themselves from being contagious and from catching this disease. But I think that the effect of seeing a law enforcement officer whose face you can't see, you can't tell if he's smiling or if he's looking at you aggressively. It's like masks are not going to help the situation. Yeah. They're essential, and I will just say it's a vastly complicated issue. But I think that we can all agree that there are a lot of great cops out there who are forced to be in situations where they are at risk of getting sick. A lot of cops have gotten sick, and they have to do what they need to do in order to protect themselves. But it does strike fear into the hearts of many. Yeah. See a cop in a mask, when you get pulled over or experience on the street. Certainly much more for people who don't have the same skin color as I do.
Yeah. I mean, I know early on when the recommendations from the government started going out about people wearing masks, lots of people of color were like, wait a minute, hold up. When I wear a mask, it's different. it comes off different. It hits different, as we say. And if I'm decided to wear a bandana mask, whereas I may be profiled and all this other stuff, when all I'm trying to do is follow the rules, I'm just trying to protect myself. And it's similar in some ways. In that way, it's similar to what we've seen on Watchmen and just kind of that general social discourse we've been having about how our lives are changing. So I'm curious to know, what do you think? Do you think? I mean, right now, America, as we know, is completely changing. So at least from a social perspective of it, do you have any thoughts about where we're going right now?
That's a great question, and the answer is I don't know where we're going. I mean, I think that I live in LA, so I'll use an earthquake metaphor. Which, when there's an earthquake here, you feel your house shake, and then it stops shaking, and you can go and you can assess the damage. And there may be some aftershocks, but you can sort of understand like what broke and what didn't break. And then you turn on the television or go on the internet and you see that the epicenter was, 10 miles away, and that it was a 6.2 magnitude quake on the Richter scale. Right now, I feel like we're in the midst of an earthquake, but we don't know where the epicenter is. We don't know what the magnitude of it on the Richter scale is. We don't know how long it's going to last. And that's created, I'd say like our default position is really confusion. We look to the past, particularly the pandemic of 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic, which was a century ago. So the received information, the way that whether or not we trusted our government, the idea that things happened, you got your information much more on a local level than on a federal level. You trusted the information that you were getting. All of those things are completely and totally up in the air. And as we've learned, the pandemic, is affecting different people entirely differently. And so this thing that we call the economy, Wall Street doesn't seem to be suffering that much, but, unemployment is at depression level rates. And so I think that the economic consequences, imbalance in our society, not just in the United States, but worldwide, is probably going to increase. The virus feels like it has illuminated and magnified and made more clear, shined a light on all the inequities that we've been talking about. They're impossible to ignore now, but I'm not sure that information is going to change society for the better. I hope it does. I hope it does, but I'm cynical.
Wow.
Probably rightfully so. I'm sure. I mean, we're in a Western society. Like, first of all, like you can barely, half of these people, you can barely get them to wear a mask, even though you're telling people the purpose of it is to protect your fellow person on the street, and that is for some Karens out there considered oppression. So.
Oh right, yeah. Oh, the Karens. Yeah.
There was a Kathy today, and I was just so amazed that her name was actually Kathy. I was like, how perfection could that be? And I know she spelled it with a K. Like, I know, maybe three of them.
No, I mean, I just get the cynicism. Like, I get it. Like, but I'm really, I don't know. It's like I get the cynicism, but I also have like this glimmer of hope that maybe death will be enough to make people change their tune and change their ways. But I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
Well,
I never give up hope, but like again, I know that I'm preaching to the converted, but it's like it's easy for me to be hopeful. I mean, like, and so it 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 almost feels obnoxious for me to say, like, look at all the people coming out on their balconies and applauding. It's like I don't have any skin in the game, and I'm just saying this because I was deeply moved by some of the healthcare workers who are basically like, by calling me a hero, you're actually dehumanizing me. Like, and this is my job. This is what I have to do. A hero runs into a burning building when they're not a firefighter, like it's their job to, and they're living. They don't have the luxury of saying, I'm not going to go into work today. And so I think that like it's really expanded, my vision to some degree. And I hope that we emerge from this better than we were when we went into it. And I'm not cynical about that. I just, I feel like I'm seeing sometimes an entirely different reality than other people are seeing, and that, the reality should be an empirical, subjective thing. We should be convinced about whether or not the coronavirus is a threat.
Right.
Like that's not an argument that people should be having. We can have an argument about how much of a threat it is, but I don't know. It's crazy making.
Yeah.
Oof. All right. Well, one thing you said on the last episode about Watchmen was that America is and I love this quote, it's America is in the midst of a very intense and painful reckoning, much more painful for people of color. White people are being dragged kicking and screaming into the reckoning. And that felt like the why now for Watchmen. And like I said, it's one of my favorite quotes that we've had on the show. But my question is, and this is something I've been pondering lately, even ever since this started, is like, how much more kicking and screaming are we going to have to deal with? And is there, like, hope for that Star Trek future? Because that's what I've been thinking about a lot. I know that on Star Trek, hella bad things happened before they get to the Federation.
Yeah.
So I'm like, is this the bad thing that's going to start us on that path, or is there going to be more kicking and screaming?
Well, I think that there is going to be kicking and screaming, but I don't necessarily see kicking and screaming as a bad thing, especially if at the end of it, you have an epiphany or a revelation. I think that the kicking and screaming is this, it's this red pill idea where, I'll speak nerd language because it's our shared language, but it's sort of like there's that scene in The Matrix where Joe Pantoliano is sitting down with Keanu Reeves and they're eating steaks, and Joe Pantoliano is basically saying, I wish that I'd never swallowed that damn pill because I know this isn't a real steak, but the reality is he's seen the truth, and the truth is the idea of like knowing that you're actually like a bald fetal-like human that is hooked up to all these robots that are sucking your life energy. You don't want to know that is true because it's not as it's a subpar existence than the one that you're leading. But something has always bothered you in the world that you're living. You have to have these blinders on. In the process of putting the blinders off, I mean, look at what happened with Ahmaud Arbery, which is like, that was months ago. But you needed, particularly white people, needed to see it, and suddenly it's going everywhere on Instagram, and the ball finally moves because to know it, right? Like, I think if you ask most white people, if I told you the story that a young African-American man was jogging through this neighborhood and then he was gunned down in cold blood by two white guys who chased him in a pickup truck, I don't think anyone's going to go, that doesn't happen in America. You know, they're going to say, well, there must have been a good reason for it, because that's what they want to cling on to. Mm-hmm. Then you see it, and you realize your brain starts to go, there is no good reason. And then you have to reconcile what it means to be living in a country where that can happen. And not only where it can happen, but those two guys can literally, they're not only not arrested, they're not brought down to the police station for questioning. There's no charges, nothing happens. So if Sean King doesn't basically amplify that message and get it, and so it starts popping up in Facebook feeds, then there is no justice. And that's what I'm talking about, kicking and screaming, which is, and so are you going to look at that as a one-off and you feel good about calling the local DA, or are you transformed? So now it's Breonna Taylor, right? It's a month after what happened to her. And so are you activated now, or do you go back to sleep? And that's what I'm talking about, kicking and screaming, which is you have to leave the comfortable cocoon that you have been ensconced in order to see these things. And then it becomes incredibly overwhelming, and there's all sorts of reasons not to them, because it was just easy. Your life was easier before. Yeah. And that's a hard process to go through. I don't think that anybody should be patted on the back or commended for seeing the truth, but at the same time, it's an incredibly hard truth, because as I think that I said the last time that we spoke, Cord Jefferson, one of the incredible writer-producers on Watchmen, he said equality feels like imbalance. And he said white people want, well-intentioned white people want to bring people of color up so that we're all equal. But what they don't realize is that the teeter-totter is actually balancing. And so as they are coming up, you feel like you are losing power. And the process of that feeling of losing power, ceding power, that's the kicking and screaming. And I went through it myself on Watchmen, where it's sort of like I went into it with a willingness to cede power. When it actually started to happen, I was like, I do not like being out of control. I'm used to being in charge. What does it feel like to not be in charge? It doesn't feel great, but once it's over, once you've moved through the kicking and screaming part, your body relaxes, and then you're living it closer to the truth than you were before. And that unsettling, nagging feeling of, I have to ignore this, keep walking, don't look, keep walking, just keep the blinders on. That's gone. And there's relief in that too, but it does make you more cynical.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I just wanted to jump in, because I just wanted to, you brought up something that just reminded me of, that idea of the Sean Kings and the rest of them who share this information, like you said, it shows up in some white person's Facebook feed. My major problem with just that approach is that it's this constant stream of violence against Black bodies. And that is constantly being used to say, oh, well, yes, it's real. Look at this. Look at what's happening. You see this lynching or this and that. And again, this is not towards you personally, Dame. This is just that how this machine seems to keep working, that nothing seems to matter or is real until people see it. Okay, but how much violence against Black bodies do we need to see? How much trauma porn, how much violence porn do we need to see against Black people for you to understand, for you to say, okay, this is actually happening? So I just wanted to make that point, that's something that personally has bothered me. And even people who use that as a currency to disseminate information, I have a problem with that.
And even and even to jump in there, because we talked about this on Watchmen when we first met, because we hadn't finished the season, so I didn't know anything. But I know, like, after I saw the first episode the first time, I was like, man, F this show. It wasn't until I saw the rest of the episodes that I started being like, okay, all right, I see where they're going. I can deal with this. When I saw the first episode, I was like, hell no. Like, no way do you use, Tulsa like that and have, the dragons and all that. And we talked about all this. And now that I've seen the entirety of the show, I think.
And the thing about Watchmen is, the intro, obviously that first episode was very, especially for you, Ben, with your background from where you're from, that was very deep. But what we come to recognize after continuing watching the show is it wasn't about gratuitous violence against Black bodies. That wasn't the point. That wasn't the currency to tell this story. So that's why I think that's why you were able to shift and say, oh, okay, there's something else going on with Watchmen.
Yeah, there's a lot more going on with it, but even then, at the same time, I still, that first episode is still hard for me. It's still very difficult. It'd probably be the one I watched the least if I watched it again because that still is too. It's so close to home.
No,
Yeah.
and I think I said this to you before, and if I didn't, obviously a lot of time has passed, and I've heard more responses to the show, but you are not alone. In fact, you are not even in the minority in terms of having that experience. And I think that it's a lot to ask, people that sort of hang in, basically say like, we understand that this is going to be triggering. We understand that this is going to be traumatic. We understand that it might feel exploitative, and even unnecessary, but it is essential. You're just not going to know it for another 6 weeks.
Right.
I think if we were living in a different society where you didn't like where you felt like that could be trusted, and more importantly, look at who the messenger is. It's me. So I don't think you ever felt I had malicious intent, but it certainly wouldn't have been beyond reality for you to think this guy knows what he's talking about. And you'd be right. You'd be right. I didn't know what I'm talking about, so I let other people talk. That's the only reason that the show is authentic. It's not like they taught me how to talk authentically. I got out of the way and let them talk. And so that's the only, at the end of the, you can't make an argument about whether or not that the show works or the show doesn't work. It does. That's all in the eye of the beholder. I'm sure there are people who watch the show in its entirety and they still feel like this is uncool. Like, I don't like that you did this. And I understood going in that was a significant risk, but I decided in the past I would not take that risk. On Lost example, which I've been thinking a lot about lately because it's about to be the 10-year anniversary of the finale. And my wife and my son, my wife is rewatching the show, but my son, who's 13, is watching it for the first time. And I'm not watching it with them, but I can hear it in the other room. And one of the huge regrets I have is Harold Perrineau, who's one of the greatest actors that I've ever worked with, just completely underused his talent and also did not write him as a black man. No. Just sort of like he's just a dad, and I'm so evolved that I don't see color. But Harold would say all the time, Harold would say, if I was the only black person on this island, there would be a lot of shenanigans going on.
Yes.
And you should, and I was like, I don't want to take that risk because I could get it wrong. And if I get it wrong, it's going to be harmful. And so that's the risk you take. It's not even about damage to my own reputation as a storyteller, but you guys know it could be harmful. Yeah. Because, so you say, why risk it? I'll just leave that storytelling to people of color. White people shouldn't be telling these kinds of stories. And I was trying to reconcile all of that. And then that was all sort of preceding the intention and the design behind what went into Watchmen, the sort of like my compulsion and obsession with Ta-Nehisi Coates, and then listening to Ta-Nehisi Coates on a podcast saying, all these white people want to have meetings with me so that I will give them the stamp. But and I was like, oh shit, that's what I want to do. Shit, he knows, like he knows. Yeah.
Damon, Ta-Nehisi was like a really good friend of mine. Like we went to Howard University together. I've known him since like early days.
You cannot get away from it.
It's so hilarious to me when people talk about him like that because I've known. I mean, he is that dude though. Don't get me fucking. That man is that dude. But like I've known him since way back, and he's always been that dude when it comes to writing, and he's always been super intelligent. But me and him would sit there and have these arguments over hip hop albums and stuff. So that's where I know him from. And it's so funny to see him as this. Oh my God. Yeah, as Ta-Nehisi Coates.
The stamp. Yeah. I love that. That's a hilarious story because it's just like you're like, oh my God, I got found out. Like,
yeah. True.
And you know what? We're talking about Watchmen. Last time you were on the show, like we had saw like the did we have finished? I don't know if we finished it or we only saw the first 6 episodes. One or the other.
You've seen the first
Yeah,
six.
we hadn't finished.
Right.
No, we definitely hadn't finished.
We've seen the first six, and we had our views and all that. Then we finished it, and the world had their views. Now that this is all said and done, the finale aired. What is the best and the worst reaction you got to the series, or even the finale itself?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I'm being honest when I say like I don't think there are best reactions and worst reactions. I think that there's obviously a sliding scale of them. I think that most everybody sort of understood what it was we were trying to say, and the best reaction is just to circle back on what we were talking about a couple minutes ago. Is that I heard is that I started watching my arms tightly crossed, and then when it was over, I felt like it was worth the journey. That doesn't mean that I loved every single moment of it, but I feel like, you showed me something that I hadn't entirely seen before. It was unexpected. Authenticity is what we're always going for. And in a television show where there's a character who can create worlds and glows blue and floats around and can make people's heads explode, it's hard to make something feel grounded and real and authentic alongside like this massive sort of like genre convention. But you mentioned Star Trek earlier, and that's a perfect example of using genre to basically tell stories about society as it exists now, or maybe even be aspirational. Watchmen is a cynical text. The Old Testament is very cynical and pragmatic and realistic. That's why it feels real. And so this idea of like reading those 12 issues and starting to understand that the good guys weren't going to win, and then kind of being confused about who the good guys even were. Like Adrian Veidt does save the world, so Rorschach is going to expose him. So was Rorschach the bad guy all along, or are these ideas of good guys and bad guys in general completely and totally not true to form? It seemed to argue the idea of like anybody who puts on a mask is someone we should worry about. Maybe we're worried about them because they're dangerous. Maybe we're worried about them because they're traumatized. But this is not a healthy behavior for people to be engaging in. And so I feel like people got it. And to me, there were some reviews or even think pieces after the 9 episodes aired that were, negative on the show, but they were so well reasoned. I was basically like, this person just basically wrote like 8 pages about why the show didn't work, but that's cool.
Yeah. Like
I would rather have 8 pages on why the show didn't work than 1 page on why it did. I mean, people went deep, and that because we went so deep in our process. It took so long to make this thing, and we are constantly running the paradox of approaching it with confidence, but also second guessing ourselves, asking every day, is this the story we should be telling? Are we allowed to tell this story? Are we getting it right? And then being like, I think so. And then moving forwards, because if you're shaky, if you are insecure, if you're doubtful, the audience can smell it on you. And but there's also an arrogance in coming in and basically being like, if I had come to New York Comic Con, when I met you guys that night, and I had come out on the stage and I was just like, guys, you are about to watch the best television show of your lives. You can't come at it that way either. I really didn't know. And now I feel I'm really proud of the work that was done, just because of the conversation around it, and it feels like it connected in some way. But as it was happening, and even as it was airing, I wasn't sure. And I think that was what kept me sane. It's important to constantly second guess yourself as long as you're still moving forwards, as long as you don't use that as an excuse to stop.
Indeed. And you guys haven't stopped. and because I've actually got that Peabody nomination. So congratulations on that for
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's a cool one.
That's really, really
Thank
cool.
you.
What was your first thought when you heard the news? I deserve it. Joke.
It's super exciting. I mean, the Peabody is it's a very cool award because it's like they single out TV shows, also broadcast journalism, podcasts, children's programming. So I've been fortunate enough. We won one for Lost, and we also won one for The Leftovers. And so you go to that show, and you're basically surrounded by like, you know, legit, like brilliant Pulitzer Prize winning journalists. So it feels like that's a cool little corner for them to appreciate Watchmen. But I think more than anything, you know, the Peabody nomination came in the midst of the pandemic. And I think that, you know, it was a bright spot in the day for sure, but it's like you start to have a little bit of perspective about, like, you know, these WTFs, these trophy sets, and it's a total honor. But I also think, like, how excited am I allowed to be over getting a Peabody nomination when, you know, 3,000 people died today, and so the coolest thing about Watchmen as it relates to the awards circuit is that, like, a single episode, This Extraordinary Being, the 6th episode, it was nominated for a GLAAD award. It was nominated for an NAACP award. And so, like, the idea that I would ever be involved in something that would be nominated for both of those things, you know, and that was I went to the Image Awards. That was about a month before, or 6 weeks before the shutdown. And so, like, that's my image. I think award shows are going to change moving forward for at least the foreseeable future. And I'm just like, you can't take those things for granted. And I really appreciate, you know, being in that room and sitting at that table and, you know, having my tuxedo on, surrounded by so many other incredible talents. Like, so I have a lot more perspective on it now, and it's super cool.
That's what's up.
Another thing on Watchmen, and you were talking about this earlier, is that you broke one of the rules in writing to write what you know. And you reached out to other creators to tell a story that you couldn't have told on your own. So what was something you would say that you learned personally while creating the series?
Well, this is sort of an oversimplification, but it gets at the core of your question, which is, like, don't be afraid to ask. I think, like, again, for someone in my position, after 15 years in the business and the last, you know, being perceived as a showrunner, there's like an expectation that I know what I'm doing. And so, like, there's this sort of adage, fake it until you make it, which kind of works in a lot of scenarios, right? Because the only way to learn is to kind of do it. Like, nobody's an expert, and you can't gain expertise until you try something, and there's going to be a lot of failure on your way. But, like, particularly in this instance, there were a lot of writers and producers starting in the writer's room, but then, you know, as we started getting into the production of the show, who were younger and less experienced than I was. And so it's kind of, it was a bit of an ego hit for me to turn to them and basically say to them, I don't know, you know, do you know? Because people get scared when the person in the position of leadership, like, I am no fan of Donald Trump's stretch of the imagination. I could go on for the next 5 minutes about how not a fan I am, but I don't want him to get that podium and say, guys, I got to be honest with you, I don't know what's going on.
So you don't want him to say that.
I don't want him to say that. I want even though that's the truth, but what I do want him to say is, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not an expert on viruses. So I'm gonna actually step away from the podium, and I'm gonna let these guys talk, or, you know. And so that's real leadership. And so I had to get comfortable with saying I don't know when I didn't know. And I also had to know when to back off of ideas, because I can really get stuck on something if I feel like I'm right. And
I know that.
I've been
you
there.
know,
I've been there.
and then but you don't sometimes, if you fight and fight and fight, you can convince others. They can start to see things your way. They're not giving in, they're actually understanding. Then there are other times when you're like, everyone, you just look around the table and they're all looking at you the same, and then they start looking at each other, and their expression seems to be like, are you going to tell them? And I'm like, oh, like, I should shut the fuck up right now. Like, and but it takes experience to know when to give up, because giving up is not something that I ever want to do, but it's necessary. Very necessary.
I mean, this goes into that. Something else we talked about last time is that you personally want to hire people who challenge you. And I've been thinking about this a lot since you were here, because sometimes I feel personally, in my experience in Hollywood and just online and social media, everywhere, I can be extremely challenging. And I try and not even like get into arguments with people on Twitter, or even if I feel like the other day, I won't name them, but bid director, I read an interview with them and I was like, oh my God, like, what are you talking about, dude? And I wanted to go on Twitter and just, say, yo, this is all not, but that person might be in a position of power where I, would come into conflict or wouldn't be able to get hired or something. So how do we make it where POC and other underrepresented people can speak freely?
Man, I wish I knew the answer to that question, because we all have to acknowledge that the playing field and that the rules are not the same. And for a person of color to challenge inside that system, they're going to get all sorts of adjectives stuck on them that are not going to be stuck on a white person. Same with a woman. Like it's the whole, like, when you say the word ambitious and it's attached to a white man, good. If you use the word ambitious and you stick it on a white woman, has an entirely different, watch your back.
Right.
It's an
Right.
entirely different connotation. So the first thing that I would say is like, understand the coding. And like, it's the last thing in the world that I would ever say to you is like, be deferential. Like, that's not the answer societally, and it's not the answer in terms of success in the industry. But I will say, like, the people that I was personally attracted to, and the people that I hired on Watchmen, or more in general that I want to collaborate, it's sort of like, it's really all in how you challenge. And the difference is, it's not about the language or the bearing or the level of intensity. I like intensity. It's really about coming from a place of, I trust you, but I'm going to challenge you. And that is a different thing than, I do not trust you and I'm going to challenge you. So, like, the first thing that I would just basically say is, let's just take this individual who gave an interview that made you have the response that you did. First off, I'd say, I don't know if you heard them giving it or it was written down.
No,
but like,
written. Yeah.
So, like, even giving them the benefit of the doubt, let's just assume the context is exactly the way that you understood it to be, like, that you understand entirely what they said. The question that I would ask you is, do you trust that person? Like, is what they said disappointing to you because you were kind of like, I thought this person was better than that?
No.
And, and so I'd say, like, that's probably a person best avoided.
Yeah.
Don't go and work with that person.
Yeah.
Like, seek out the people who are worthy of your trust. Work with them until you're ready to be the boss yourself. And then, like, this is all about getting PCs in positions of power. And that's not just about being showrunners, it's about running networks and studios. I landed in Los Angeles in 1994. It is 2020. And I've seen two people of color as either the head of a studio or a network in all of that time, across all the studios and networks. I'm talking the big boss. Like,
yeah.
and so, and there was still a high degree of tokenism. It wasn't like they were, you know, they were in a position where they could start hiring other people of color. It was still like they were an island, and they were an island in the sea of white people, and like that's a problem. And everyone in the industry is like, that's a problem. No one quite knows how to solve it, other than, you know, start at the bottom, which is basically like, I started at the bottom. I was given an opportunity to be a writer's assistant, you know, to be an assistant on an agent's desk, and then a writer's assistant, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'll just say, like, as an employer now, I basically say, like, I have to start creating job opportunities for people of color. They're harder to find than white people for all the reasons that we're well aware, right? Like, but once you find them, like, you know, they're just as qualified, if not more, than any person who's not white. You can't be discriminatory. There's laws and people yelling about reverse affirmative action, et cetera, et cetera. You have to drown that shit out and just do it. But like, the short answer to your question is, like, there are people who are worthy of your trust, and they still say stupid shit. I was one. I would like to think myself as one of them. I say less stupid shit now than I did 5 years ago, but I still say it. And if I emerge from the situation of Watchmen thinking like, oh, I got this now, then you should not trust me.
No, I wouldn't.
I emerged from the situation of Watchmen going like, I'm better off. I know more than I did before. Still a long way to go. That worked, so I'm going to do more of that. And like, that's the process. But like, there are a lot of, we talked about my cynicism before. There are a lot of well-intentioned individuals in positions of power out here, and in New York, who are worthy of trust, and just, I would say, see through the stupid shit that they say. Let them know somehow that you trust them. Because if you let them know that you trust them, and you don't have to be deferential, they'll really listen to the challenge. My fear is that if the challenge comes without the trust, they just write you off. They don't even hear it. They ignore it. And in fact, they calcify.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be that. It shouldn't be that way. You know, this is all under the acknowledgement of the rules are different for you. The playing field is slanted. Acknowledging that, I'm just trying to give you a productive answer that isn't, you know, be deferential. You cannot be deferential. You have to challenge.
Yeah, no, and I'm definitely not deferential still, but like you said, I knew the person who went out before I read the interview. They weren't somebody who I could. Yeah, I mean, but you know, it's a director.
They weren't.
Yeah, they weren't somebody I could really trust in that regard. And so when I read it, it just more confirmed my fears. I was like, oh yeah, you know, another one. Like, yeah, so, but there are people, like, even before we met, you know, even though I can tell you, I definitely had problems with how Michael and Walt were written on Lost. You know, Lost was such a show to me that, you know, that's why, even when I told you when we ran into your Comic-Con that night, I was still kind of upset about the first episode of Watchmen, but I was like, this motherfucker made The Constant, you know, like, so I'm gotta give him that, you know, like, I gotta give him that first, you know, like, he did do that, so, you know, there has to be some trust.
What I love about our interaction was that you were able to tell me that. I felt like we were strangers, but I felt like I had your trust, and then we took a selfie together, and I was like, you know,
welcome to America.
Yeah, welcome to America. That's right. It's sort of like, that's the thing. I mean,
there's Hassan Minaj he's a comedian, journalist, and he has this clip where he's standing outside of some event.
Yeah, he does Patriot Act.
Yes.
Right?
Oh yeah, and he has a clip where he's standing outside an event, and someone from his neighborhood comes over and starts screaming on him and telling him how he's wrong about the politics and this and that, and barking at him, and he's like, your parents would be disappointed in you, da-da-da-da-da, and then they take a selfie together.
I mean, what would this nation be without the discourse, right? I mean, what do you mean? You know what? Damon, you said something that now is it's kind of okay. It's seeping into what we're doing and what's happening now, the current state of things. So you talked about the slanted playing field. That playing field for people of color, white people in Hollywood has always been slanted, and now it's even inverted a little bit because now you have a situation where the writers' rooms are moving online. People have, at least for the last few years, have had access to actually do productions on their own. So, like even us right now, we're doing a production now. We have our equipment, we have our, all this stuff running. At this point, does the future of Hollywood look bright to you? Like, do you see it going in a better direction? What does it look like to you?
I do. I do think, for all the reasons you just said, like that the tool to create pretty high production value content without having to go through the process of being told by people traditionally financing that stuff what you can and cannot do. And when you don't have to convince someone to give you money, you end up getting pretty hurt. I think like that's something that history has kind of has kind of proven. And I think that also the idea of like, this DIY approach, you're able to show proof of concept versus having to try to explain to someone what something's going to look like before it actually exists. So that gives me a lot of hope. And then also I just think like the resources and information that's at everybody's fingertips. I went to school and at NYU, and one of the things you do in film school, in addition to making movies, is you watch movies and you talk about them. And I'm in 1991, and so there were video cassettes and some people laser discs, but like just to get access to movies was something that you had to physically leave your house and go like in a video store. And if it was like a weird, obscure French foreign language film, you had to go to a specialty store, and they might or might not have that video cassette. Right. Someone might have rented it. Now you can literally just like someone can tweet about a movie and you can just stream it. And so I think that the collective collective consciousness, the artistic consciousness, what we have access to, what we can see, and the immediacy of it is making us, we're like this big collective AI brain. Again, to go back to the Matrix, it's like when Neo's like, no kung fu, it all just like gets downloaded into his brain instantaneously. Now, the experience of learning kung fu is lost, but I think that like this idea of being self-taught, look at Tarantino, for example, who's one of my favorite filmmakers. He didn't go to film school, but he watched so many movies. And so when he started making his food, it had all these crazy ingredients that weren't necessarily designed to play with each other, but then did. And so he advanced the form by actually remixing the form. And, Tarantino never would have made Reservoir Dogs if he hadn't worked in a video store. Mm-hmm. And so that part of it makes me very, very hopeful. And, I like the other thing that gives me hope is what we were talking about before, which is like, I think that there's a lot of good intention. And I think that this idea, when I came into business again, there were 4 major television networks. And if you can get one of those television networks, HBO existed, Showtime existed, but it would only do like 2 or 3 dramas. Like if then you're done. But now so much, like there, and it's become very niche. And the metric for success, like more fringy shows like Pen 15 or David Makes Man, or like, you don't need to get 5 million people to watch these shows for them to get a second season. It just has to be someone's favorite show. And like, so there's a little bit more of an artisanal approach to success. And I think a much wider range of what people will roll the dice on that makes, if you just look at the shows that were like, on the Peabody list or the AFI list, aggregators of like, here are, you go like, this is a pretty cool, these shows all came in the last year, like Unbelievable is another show where I mentioned is like, if you go in and pitch it and go like, this is a story about sexual assault. The victim is basically not believed by the cops. They think that she made it up. And it's an 8-episode exploration of her story. Like a decade ago, no one's making that. Look at like When They See Us. Talk about kicking and screaming, by the way. It's sort of like everyone knew that the Central Park Five were innocent, but it's like, do we really need to see that? Because that's going to make me feel bad. It's going to make me feel bad that these guys were forced to, were forced to confess, and then subsequently, were charged, and years of their lives were stolen. Why would I want to watch that when I can watch Fleabag? But people watched it, and it's incredible, and it's being celebrated. And so I'm not entirely sure that would have been made a decade ago.
Yeah.
And so I do feel like a lot of great stuff is being made right now. Probably more excited about TV than movies. Personally speaking, I think good films are being made, but I think all the excitement is in television, which is, by the way, it's not even calling it TV anymore. I mean, we watch this stuff on our laptops, on our phones, on our iPads. I don't want to call it content, but
you hit the nail on the head, because the other day I was writing a tweet about good TV or good shows on TV right now. And then I stopped and I said, wait a minute, it's not really television. What do we call it? Like, we say streaming, I guess, but is there even a name for it anymore? And like, I don't know. It's just, again, this is nebulous blob of content that just comes down the internet pipeline. And I guess that's a good thing that we can't really put it in a box, because then it kind of just allows for that free form expression. But you said that, you're looking more forward to TV. Is there anything out right now that you're really interested in, or any upcoming projects that you're really interested in?
In terms of watching, or in terms of?
In terms of watching, yeah. In terms of you just watching as a viewer.
I'm excited about the show Sweet Tooth that just got announced on. It's going to be a Netflix show. It's an incredible comic book written by this guy, Jeff Lemire. It is, incidentally, about a pandemic that wipes out the majority of the planet. And then, like, right before the pandemic hits, human-animal hybrids start getting born mysteriously. And it's just this incredibly emotional, powerful, like, it's the end of the world told in a way that I've never seen before. And the comic book ran for about 5 years, and it's just the ending is so immensely satisfying. It's so great. And so I haven't seen the show, but I'm really really, 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 really looking forward to that one. I don't know, like, there are shows that literally like have done their entire runs. Like, I just found out that Killing Eve has been back for like a month, and I was like, what? It happened? Like,
Yep.
So it's like, if a show is like super on my radar, like Rick and Morty, I know when it's back, but otherwise, like, I just wait for the algorithm to recommend things to me.
I hope the algorithm recommended Little Fires Everywhere to you. It's on Hulu.
I haven't seen that. No, is it? That's the Kerry Washington.
That's Kerry Washington. Yes, that's Reese Witherspoon, Anika Noni Rose. It's an amazing ensemble cast of characters. But I highly recommend you take a look at that. Little Fires Everywhere on Hulu.
And that's just a limited series, right? It's open and shut.
Well, it completely.
Or it could go on.
We don't know. We don't know.
Okay.
I personally think it's wrapped up so nicely that it should just stay as it is. But there are calls for a second season, so who knows?
Gotcha.
Much like your show, Watchmen.
Yes.
Unless you did, have any idea for that, that second season. But if you want to drop a exclusive on here, we wouldn't mind.
No. This is over. See, this is funny because people, like, for months after your interview, Damon, people kept asking. They're like, okay, but season 2, right? And I'm like,
look.
You got to understand, this is kind of a self-contained story. Like, did you listen? Like, did you really watch what we watch? Because it's a self-contained story. That being said, people have said things like, well, why don't we go into why don't we go to the backstory of either what happens after she gets the powers? I'm like, that's a season 2, sir. then they say, okay, well, what if we go into the backstory of some of these characters, like Looking Glass? Now that's something I said, aha, I would be interested in something like that. Would you even entertain anything like that?
I feel like I would. I'm not saying anything new here, but I would love to see another season of Watchmen. Not a second season, but another. And so I'm making like, you know, this idea of Watchmen, what it is. I hope that our season basically demonstrated that you can call something Watchmen, and it needs to have a relationship with the thing that preceded it, but it can actually introduce entirely new ideas and expand the tent somewhat. And I think that the way you keep it fresh is from someone who came from comic book culture, not writing it but reading it, that a writer and an artist would basically come on and they would do an iconic run of a character. So, you know, Alan Moore famously did that on Swamp Thing, and Frank Miller did it with The Dark Knight, and then he did an epic run on Daredevil. As you know, Ta-Nehisi did an incredible run on Black Panther. You know, and so. But these characters pre-existed the writer, but then the new writer comes in and reimagines with a huge sort of adherence to canon, but presents a new way of looking at that character that kind of changes things moving forward. And so all I ever said is I shouldn't be the one running the next season of Watchmen, but I would never I actually invite others to go for it, and anything that I can do, any way that I can use my power and influence to make that happen, I will. But I think that it's, I would love to see someone else's spin on it. And I say this because I know that like Fargo is a great show, and Noah Hawley is doing Fargo right now, but the Coen brothers created Fargo. And it feels like it's a love letter to the Coen brothers, but he also did his own thing. And so that basically means 5 years from now, someone else can do Fargo. And they may have loved what Noah did, but they're going to be different than Noah, and they're going to look at it through a slightly different lens. And that's, more people should do that. I mean, look at the Batman movies. Chris Nolan did his run. He's done with Batman. And now Matt Reeves is going to come in and do his run. What would Ryan do with it? Or has he already done it with Black Panther? So I think that there's space in these myths for new interpretations. That's what keeps them fresh. And I just know that I'd be so tempted to do the obvious in another season of Watchmen. And I also it was so exciting for us to say every good idea that we had, we were doing in those 9 episodes. We weren't going to save anything. And that's the way that you should do it. You should live every day like it's your last, and you should tell stories at any time, you'll run out of breath and that's the end. And so although those 9 episodes were very specifically designed to have a beginning, middle, and end, and it doesn't mean that the things that happen next wouldn't be interesting, but I just kind of feel like, okay, I read Watchmen. I loved it for 30 years. And then I finally, decided that I was going to try to adapt it in some way in partnership with a bunch of other people who felt similarly. Now it's someone else's turn.
It's a challenge, you guys.
Yeah. It's actually a challenge to the two of you.
Oh,
I'm up for the challenge.
I'm definitely.
I'm wearing the shirt already. I'm ready.
But this is also something that I wanted to ask you about, because it's something that I've been battling with this myself lately. I mean, I've had just all kind of years personally and things since I was actually working on a show in Hollywood, but I've also come to a realization, and this isn't in an egotistical way or anything, but I just also know that Hollywood needs me. Because it needs people who have these ideas, who have something to say, who are people of color, who are underrepresented. But at the same time, I want to create things that I feel like are helpful to the human condition. And then I'm also battling with the idea of, well, Hollywood wants, something that's going to sell and marketable and all these other things. So do you have any advice for creators who are stuck between these worlds and just want, especially I feel like POC have this problem more so, where we feel like we have to say something when we create something?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, it comes with the acknowledgement of like what the challenge is, and I think that this is true for anybody who's kind of trying to break in, is that there's like this sort of belief of you have to pay your dues, right? Like in one form or another. And certainly for me, my dues paying was, 5 years of basic apprenticeship positions before I even got a job as a writer's assistant. And then I worked on Nash Bridges and Crossing Jordan for another 4 years. So those, I'm very proud of, working on those shows and what I learned there, but they certainly wouldn't be perceived as, like incredible Pantheon quality television dramas. But the idea of like, you move into it with a perspective of patience. Now this is easy for me to say once again, like patience is actually a weapon that is used by the people in positions of power to neutralize the power of people who don't have it. Be patient, wait your turn. Yep. You're going to get a chance. And meanwhile, you're getting cut in line constantly, right? Like, so let's acknowledge that that's going to happen too. So it's sort of like, but you can't be impatient either. And it's sort of finding that balance. And what I would say, I'll give you a very specific answer to your question versus a vague one, which is like, predetermine the length of your fuse. And so say, I'm going to be patient for 6 months. Mm-hmm. Then it's time to give me, then it's time to move into telling the kind of stories that I need to tell, or being in a position where I can be making a difference. And then honor your fuse, but also tell other people how long your fuse is so that you don't spring it on them. So like if for example, you're interviewing for a staff writing position or a story editor position on someone's show, you basically say to them, hey, look, I have a lot to bring to your show. And for the first season that I'm on the show, I'm going to do everything in my power to realize your vision. That's the perspective that I'm going into it with. But after that first year, my expectation is that I can start to kind of pitch things that you will listen to and appreciate. So I'm going to move out of a modality about servicing your vision, and hopefully you'll start to hear a little bit about what mine is. And if you don't like that, then don't hire me. Like now, what is that kind of honesty going to result in? Who knows? But I can tell you that the alternative isn't going to work. Mm-hmm. And I think that I always respond, particularly in interviews, to people who say, here's what I want to get out of this. I actually ask them, like, you're obviously not sitting here on my couch because you want to serve me, so how can I serve you? And people are surprised, disarmed, suspicious of that question. They feel like it's a trap.
I was going to say suspicious.
But the people who answer it and say like, here's what you can do for me, I'm like, excellent. Like I can work with that, because that's where you get real loyalty, is understanding that the loyalty has to flow both ways. I know that I'm in a position of power and you're in a position of being, a subordinate, but we're still partners, and we can still service each other's ambitions, understanding that like I'm here because of my experience and the amount of time that I put and energy that I put into this. But I expect you to get something out of it too, that isn't just monetary compensation or the name of the show on your resume. You gotta I want to know why you want to do the job and what I can do for you.
All right.
I know. I don't know if that's helpful.
No, it's super helpful. And I mean, everything you said during this has been really helpful, because I've been, like I said, I've been battling with a lot of different things. I've just been, I wouldn't even say writer's block, because I always have ideas. I might have a problem more so, especially when I don't have a specific deadline on me. And because I'm not, working for someone right now, I might have problems finishing things. I'm a lot easier to finish things when someone's like, okay, I need it, this week. And it's like, all right, no problem. And it's done that week. But I also have a problem because I'm sitting on the outside, and even though I have, I have people like, oh, yo, get me your script, and I did it to this person and that person. I'm also like, I don't want to just do anything. Like I worked on a show that I really loved, and I really loved what it was saying, and I like things like Watchmen interest me, and things like, even things like Wu-Tang, the show about Wu-Tang last year, I really loved that. Because even though it wasn't some big grand show, just what was saying, the story is telling, I was very interested in. But I'm not interested in just creating just to create or creating for a check. Because that's like the effing worst to me. I don't ever want to be that person, who's just, trying to write something so I can get this next check. Because that's just terrible. But one last thing I want to ask is, like, do you have any, like, you recently were talking about theme and story and all this stuff, but what's a piece of writing or creative advice that you feel that you don't hear often enough?
Oh, man. I wish I had prepared for that question. I guess, like, I think throw it out is the piece of advice that I wish that I heard more, because it's a piece of advice that was given to me immensely valuable and allow me to expand on it, which is some things that you work on, you should throw them out. And other things you should keep at, but we all have to acknowledge you shouldn't keep at everything. Now, how do you tell the difference? How do you tell the difference between what you should throw out and what you should keep at? It's hard for you to tell because it's all personal for us, right? When we embark on a new project, there's something inside us that we need to get out, and that's a compulsion. And maybe we can't quite explain why it's a compulsion, but it feels that way nonetheless. So you find 4 or 5 people, no more, maybe a couple less, 3 to 5 people who you really trust. You give them that material and you say, keep at it or throw it out. Because sometimes people in your circle, they need to be given permission to tell you to throw it out. All the time, writers will give their friends their work and say, give me notes, but they skip the part of whether or not it's notes worthy, And so,
that part.
And it's an important part, and it will save you a lot of time. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a professional writer. There are things that I should throw out, still. And you get to decide. By the way, all 5 people might tell you to throw it out. 3 of them might say throw it out. 2 of them might say keep at it, whatever. You get to decide whether or not you're going to listen to them. But at least ask the question. Because so that's the throw it out advice. Yeah. It's liberating.
No, that's brilliant because, like, I've been working on something so I can, get back to work, and so everybody's like, okay, I need a spec, I need a pilot, whatever. And I had a really good pilot idea I've been working on. And in the time I was working on it, not only did I see a related series actually come on to, air, I just realized this is not the story I wanted to tell, and I don't even want to put this out into the world anymore because I don't want this story told. If somebody else does it, that's fine, but I don't want to be responsible for putting this into the world. But it took me forever because I put so much into it, and I was like, no, you need to finish this, and then, F it, it probably won't get made anyway. You can just use it as a example or whatever, but I was just like, nah, man, this ain't it. It's not working on a lot of levels. And personally, I just wasn't feeling it. So thank you for that, because that's something I've had to learn a hard body. Like, just, go on to something else.
That's okay.
And when you do it, it's a relief. I think it is a relief. So yeah.
It's still been hard with that one, because that shit is still like, it's like right on the outside still, and it's like, come back to me, come back. And I'm like, no, I'm not working on you anymore. Like, you're not working.
No, but thank you for sharing that, Damon. That's important, to throw it out. Honestly, my heart quivered when you said that. I said, throw out my words. Oh, my God. Like,
sometimes it comes crawling out of the garbage, though, which is one of his stories is Stephen King, who I worship and would not be sitting here talking to you if it were not for his writing. His wife, Tabitha, he wrote Carrie, which was his first. He had written a couple of novels prior to Carrie that ended up being released as the Bachman book. But Carrie was his first hit. And he threw it in the garbage. He threw the manuscript in the garbage. And his wife I think they were married at the time. Maybe they were just boyfriend, girlfriend. She took it out of the garbage and read it. And
Yep.
she was like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And if she had not done that, we would not be talking right now.
No.
So, you know, now, so the advice remains, throw it out.
Yep.
But if someone wants to rescue it from the garbage, then have at it.
Definitely no, but everyone else has said throw it out too.
Right.
Pretty much.
Fantastic advice.
Yeah, pretty much like 4 out of 5, I'd say. And I just know if I want to come back to it years later, maybe I will. But right now, it's just like this is not working, and I need to finish something. So it's like let this one go and finish something else. Like do it, like get it done.
I could try to get Tabitha King's email address for you. Fresh eye.
No, because all I would do is bother her and her husband about the Dark Tower forever.
You and me both.
Yeah. They did not want me sitting there. So please, like, it's the greatest thing ever, Like,
It really is.
Yeah, it really is, man. Oh God, yeah. That's one that's still. I mean, and that's another one. Like, I would not want to work on that show. No shape or form. Like, well, maybe, because it would be fun. It would be fun.
Stop lying to yourself, sir.
That's the paradox.
Fine.
Yeah, that's the paradox. Because it's like the Wu-Tang show. I love it, and I can't wait for season 2, and I'd like to work on it, but I also just want to watch season 2 and enjoy it, because I really enjoyed season 1. And then I've worked on stuff, and afterwards it's a different feeling. So, yeah. Well, man.
You can't.
No.
The magic is gone once you know where the wires are.
Oof, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. But, there's always other shows, so it keeps going. Oh, man. We could go on all day, but, please, thank you for one. Thank you so much for being here again.
Yes.
For being on the show, for everything you do and to support.
Thank you. I want to say thank you for not only dropping the gems, but also recognizing your own bullshit. Because you said a few times during this us chatting, you were like, "Look, I already know, man." That is probably the self-awareness is one of the most important things. So
yes.
Thank you.
Word up, man.
Let's pray that never goes away. You guys will keep honest, right?
We will let you know.
I needed a reality check. So I appreciate you guys making content right now for everyone.
Thank you.
I know you're in the city, so stay safe and trust your own gut. And I hope we all make it through okay.
Definitely.
Big facts, Damon. We're life.
Please let the internet know where they can find you at. Twitter's, Instagram, anything you've got coming up that you can actually talk about right now, or any of that. Yeah. Don't find me.
I'm at Damon Lindelof. If you can spell that, congratulations. On Instagram, I'm not on Twitter because I need to retain my sanity. And I'm working on a couple of things right now that I would not be running, but they're ideas that have come from other writers that I look at myself more as an offensive lineman, where I can block. So I don't want to be the coach. I don't want to be the quarterback, but I kind of feel like if there's a way that I can advance someone else's vision. And so there's a couple of ideas that I think are pretty cool. And I'm wrestling with this question of, what are the stories of 2022 going to look like in terms of beginning to process what's happening right now? Are people going to want escapism, or are they going to want to look at it hard and understand it and process it? And the answer is probably both at exactly the same time, as Cal Abar would say. And so ideas that are not dealing with the moment that we're in right now, I just can't sink my teeth into. I need some veggies on the plate. So I also don't want to do what I've done before. I think that the faith versus reason, free will, magical island stuff, worked that out of my system. End of the world is covered. Kind of did End of the World. And but I think I think that the social constructs, embedded in Watchmen, that's still pretty fertile ground. And so there's a way to use genre as allegory and metaphor. I'm really interested in technology right now. That's something that I feel like I spend a lot of time thinking and talking about, but it hasn't really been reflected in my work yet. And so like, I think I asked myself the question of like, what would a season of Black Mirror look like as opposed to an anthology where you take a single Black Mirror episode and do 10 of them, where you could really go deep with the idea and the characters. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about and what I'm exploring. More soon.
Awesome. Love to hear it.
Yeah, and if you do, I'll throw my ring in the hat for that, because as much as I love Black Mirror, but I also...
Wait, you'll throw your ring in the hat?
Yeah, see, that's how hype I am, right? That's how hype I am.
That's even better.
Yeah, it is, right? Kobe.
Even better. Hold on, I got to aim it. Where's the ring? Take it. You got it.
But no, that is like, because I love Black Mirror, but I also hate it because I feel like it's a show that presents problems that were created by, people like their creators of the show in some cases. But then it's like, oh, look at these problems that happened. Oh, it's terrible. Oh, well, and I hate science. I hate science fiction like that. Like, I need science fiction to either, try and answer it or give me a solution or give me some hope about it. Like, I like
this can't be open-ended darkness.
Like,
what's wrong with open-ended darkness? I mean,
the world is open-ended darkness. I don't need to be reminded of it.
It's entertaining.
Metal faces in it.
No, we hear you, David. I'm actually really excited to hear that. And as also a technology person, I'm really excited to see what you come up with. And as Ben said, I might have to throw my ring in the hat.
Yes.
That's gonna happen. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Like this was incredible. And I hope that you stay safe out in LA and I hope you get some good food while we're going through this. I hope you've been cooking and trying to do new things too.
I have. I mean,
awesome.
When I say cooking, I'm heating stuff up. But like, I've done a little bit of cooking, Okay,
good.
A little bit.
Good. Just get out your comfort zone a little bit. That being said, thank you guys so much for watching For All Nerds. As usual, you can watch us right here on Twitch, twitch.tv. That's it, right? Twitch.tv/For All Nerds. And thank you to all the Patreon fam, patreon.com/For All Nerds. And we will see you very soon.
Dylan got it bumping. Dylan got it bumping.